Hello?
Yeah, we're
Yes,
ready.
we're here.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. Legal Issues of Today. We thank you for participating. Don't forget, you can reach us on about 8 radio stations now, the internet, YouTube, and Facebook. Just type in Legal Issue of the Day. Also, we're on Biggs Radio and at biggsradio.com. So you can listen to us on about 10 to 12 different mediums now. And don't forget, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, though, and that's very important. Now, today we have our superstar panel again, Attorney Milton Grimes. Milton is a historical figure. He was the first lawyer that brought in the evolution of videotaping police misconduct in our legal system. That was, it resulted in successful eventual prosecution and civil case against the police department in LA for the beating of Rodney King. And then today also we have a second special guest, Natalie House. Natalie House is the regional director for the National Bar, but she also is with the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, outstanding lawyer. We're going to continuation of the discussion of affirmative action. It's been some adverse Supreme Court decisions that come down, and those decisions will impact us for the next generation. These decisions are really bad. And so we're going to delve right into that discussion today. Ms. House, how you doing today, counselor?
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Lee. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, ma'am.
Attorney. Okay, good. Good morning, Attorney Lee. It's very, very good to be here with you and your audience today, as well as Attorney Grimes. Thank you so much for having me here. Attorney Lee, you have been a stalwart of the National Bar Association, in particular Region 7, and just wanted to say thank you so much for having me here. And I'm looking forward to discussing these important legal decisions that have been coming out, trying to reverse all of the gains that we as Black people, African Americans, have made during after the civil rights movement.
Well, here's the problem, counselors. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled against the use of affirmative action program during admission process at colleges and university, potentially reducing the number of unrepresented students in the medical education, legal, and the professional school. What I was concerned about when I saw this decision, I thought that the most dramatic effect would be in your professional schools, like your law schools, your dental school, your medical schools. And the reason being is that I went to law school at the University of Georgia, and I got admitted not because of my test scores, because my test scores as good as the white students, but the University of Georgia didn't admit Blacks, no matter what your test score. You can make perfect scores and perfect grade. You wouldn't have been admitted if you were Black until the 60s. And because they were segregated and it was only white only. And when they started admitting Black students, they were very selective, but they gave us all full scholarship, which was a blessing. But before that, though, there was no path at all to go to the law school. And there was many law schools that had the same type of draconian admission policy. Now, to cure the problem, this current Supreme Court says we're going to eliminate affirmative action. The affirmative action, as you know, started back in the Nixon years to cure what was not just the law of the land. The court supported segregation for a long time in the Plessy versus Ferguson case. But Ms. House, Attorney House, what effect do you think that's going to have on the admission process of African American in your mind?
Well, they're definitely going to, the colleges and universities, in particular, the 2 elite schools where I live in Chicago, Illinois, have indicated that they are going to, they still appreciate, many, I think, in Harvard University is also in this category, as well as the other elite schools, they really appreciate the diversity that African Americans and other minority groups bring to the campus. So my understanding is that the University of Chicago and Northwestern University, those are the 2 largest elite schools in this city, they are going to be placing more emphasis on the essay question as a result. So to ensure that they still have a diverse student body, because diversity is very, very important. That's a very important learning tool for when you get out into the real world. I mean, the entire world, if you will, is primarily made up of people of color. The world is white people are, if you look at the world population, is actually in the minority. Most people are people of color. So I think that at the schools, they still recognize that there is a diversity is important. And so they're going to find ways to work around, to stay within the law, but then to ensure that there are still a diverse population within the schools.
Attorney Grimes, what bothers me about this is that it's not just when they attack affirmative action. Look, you and I know that when they enter a decision like that, it goes across more than just affirmative action. You see, like in your city, you have a history with all the minority. You still have a problem with the police departments here in LA, and diversity in hiring. If they eliminate it in school, how does that affect a city like LA in terms of diversity in hiring? Does that have an effect in your mind?
Well, it's just not diversity in hiring that I'm concerned about. I recently read, didn't the Supreme Court last week passed a law that businesses can discriminate against homosexuals? They don't have
Right,
to
sure.
them. Going back to the whites only, we're going back to the old days as far as what white businesses can do. It's I don't know how to address it. I'm glad you have Ms. House on here, who's an expert in this area, because they allowing the universities to bring in students from rich donors, and that select class gets special preferential treatment. Alumni students, kids get preferential treatment, but they are against minority diversity preferential treatment. So it's confusing to me. What's the baseline they're using here? Can you explain that, Ms. House?
That's a very, very good question. I think there's a lawsuit now, as a matter of fact. Harvard University is being sued, and I don't know the group of individuals that is filing the lawsuit, but they are filing a lawsuit challenging the alumni legacy admissions preference. So that goes directly towards the what you're talking about in terms of there are preferential treatment given or preferential treatment programs for white students, right? But those policies are not being challenged. They're only challenging the ones that have traditionally helped African Americans and minority students. So I don't have the specifics of the details, but I do know that that lawsuit has been filed against Harvard University. And I think that is probably maybe a step in the right direction to maybe where the Supreme Court, if the case does eventually get to the Supreme Court, and I suspect that it will, that maybe that will give the court an opportunity to correct this decision that it made, these decisions that it made. Because to your point, the LGBTQ community, what they're talking about, that issue where the court has allowed for business to discriminate against them because of their sexual orientation. The question is where does that stop? Right. You know, if businesses don't want to serve people because of your sexual orientation, well, they may say, hey, we don't want to serve you because of your race.
Right.
Or your gender.
I think that's the Fair Admission, Students for Fair Admission Incorporated versus Harvard is the name of that lawsuit. I don't know any more about it than that. I just read the name in the paper. But yeah, I mean, I think it's appalling, Nate. I don't know how you let it get this far.
Well, what happened is that, it started with the fact that we had a Supreme Court justice who, had some illness during the Obama administration, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And for whatever reason, she decided not to retire when the first leg of the Obama administration, when she first got ill, and we controlled the Senate. When she did not retire at that time period, then we lost the Senate in the midterm, and she stayed on during the Trump years. And, she got sick and then she passed. Well, that led to an avalanche of appointment by the Trump administration. So now we have an imbalanced court.
Yeah, we do.
If she would have, resigned when she first contracted the illness, it'd have been at worst 5-4, and maybe we'd have gotten lucky. But now we got a Supreme Court justice who benefited from affirmative action, who somehow has taken away the ladder that catapulted him to success, Justice Thomas, and he'd taken away the ability for other people to have that same ladder that he enjoyed. And I was reading a story about him. He was saying that he thought that they looked at him differently because of affirmative action, so he had some animosity about it. I carry with a badge of honor that the fact that I got admitted into law school because of affirmative action, but my test score was better than the typical whites that got admitted, but it wasn't that. I got admitted on affirmative action the same as they did. There was always affirmative action in admission to professional school, but it was white only. You had privilege, your uncle donated money, or your father or your parents and things like that. So there's always been this type of admission process. As like I said, admission is a new highfalutin term, but the fact remains is that we all know that if you're in the game, you have the ability to influence people to make a decision because you know them personally. And so the problem we have now is that we've kind of closed the doors, I think, to having a fair and balanced increase in African American in the professional schools more than anything else.
But you are giving preferential treatment to other groups. I got into law school because of affirmative action. I had decent grades, I had a decent score, but I don't think I would have gotten in if it had not been for affirmative action, Nate. You follow me? Into Hayes. It's a prestigious law school out here in California. We got to do something to balance this ship, and I don't know why they want to try to ignore the fact that that's still needed in this society to correct the wrongs that have been done in the past. So I don't know.
Right. I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think you talk about the past, and Nathaniel, you talked about your experience going to the University of Georgia Law School. I think it's important to talk about and remind your listeners about the outward discrimination that African Americans face for the most of this country, right? My ancestors were subjected to Jim Crow laws. I mean, Jim Crow wasn't just at the water fountains. It was also a part of our history when it was part of the college admissions process. Places like the University of Tennessee, schools like the University of Tennessee, University of Georgia, outwardly discriminated against African Americans despite their qualifications, despite their outstanding qualifications. And the rules were that for example, if it was an African American student that wanted to go to law school, let's say, for example, wanted to go to the University of Tennessee, they were a resident of Tennessee, they graduated had a college degree, and they met all of the academic requirements to go to school. The University of Tennessee or University of Georgia would not admit them just based upon their race. And so, but if they were a resident of the school and resident of the state, those states would pay for them to go to law school in another state because it was separate but equal based upon Plessy versus Ferguson, which is kind of, it's kind of shocking that that schools would take that extraordinary step to pay for them to go to another school in another state. But now, with the civil rights cases or with civil rights legislation, that outward discrimination was banned. And so that's where we have this affirmative action was created. These programs were created to correct those wrongs, even though affirmative action did not say that all qualified applicants would be able to be admitted. It only carved out a small niche of students.
Right.
And so that only created access for a small minority of students. The rest of the students were still, discriminated against. So now they're saying that even that small part, that small percentage, and I forget what the percentage is, and Marlon, you probably know better than I do, that now they're saying that's too much. That's too much.
Well, the one thing that I think has been the most significant aspect about desegregation has been sports teams, right? The University of Alabama with Bear Bryant, there was your football team there in LA, Milton, SC. I read the story about Bear Bryant. The people in Alabama didn't want blacks to go to their universities, and they had no blacks on the football team. So Bear Bryant contacted the coach of Southern Cal, and he invited them to come to Tuscaloosa to play a football game back in the late 60s. And I think it was 1969. I'm not sure the exact year, but that year, Sam the Bam Cunningham and all those black players, they ran the score on Alabama. They saw these tremendous black athletes. And so that set the precedent for Alabama to go out and get a lot of black players. Well, the University of Georgia, the first black football player, became a lawyer, Ken Dias. He opened up a law office there in Athens. And I was talking to him about that when I was in law school. I ended up doing some clerk work for him when I was at the University of Georgia Law School. And so my thought process, and that's why I think that there's going to be a focus on the professional school. But what I'm doing, I'm about solving problems. And one of the things that I thought about this week, in order to solve the problem at my church, I'm gonna start with an academic program, because these professional school admissions had a lot to do with your math and English skills, right? So students that excel in math and all the math curriculum, they would do better in these professional admission tests. And so the net result is we're going to start a program this week at my church. I'm going to speak there tomorrow in terms of outlines to show how they increase their test scores, their ability in those areas. So I think that as leaders, we have to come up with creative ways to boost our kids' test scores. And all these professional schools, as you know, they require that you have like almost an A average. You can't go into professional school with a C average, so you have to be good students. And so even with affirmative action, what most people don't realize, the Blacks and Spanish students that have been admitted, they're A-B students. They're not C students. They make good grades. And so you have to, so affirmative action don't mean that you are not qualified. It just means that you get preferential treatment because everybody that applies have outstanding credentials.
Mr. Tracy was so quiet. I talked to Anthony.
Okay.
So they increasing their knowledge or ability doesn't change their color of their skin, and that's the problem, isn't it?
Right. So the problem is that they don't want them there. They don't want to educate, because that's the history of it. Is they don't want to educate African Americans. They don't want to see more Black lawyers. They don't want to see more Hispanic lawyers. So that's where they're going. And yeah, and the LGBTQ case is very scary, because the Supreme Court is giving, private businesses the ability to just outwardly discriminate against folks. So we have to figure out ways to fight against this. The only the only bright light in this conversation is the fact that people now, especially at these larger major academic institutions, they do appreciate now what diversity brings to the table, especially as we move towards a global economy and working with people globally. So that's the bright light in this, and that these students do not, I mean, these schools have said that they do not want to continue to discriminate. They want to see more of a diverse population. But the question is how do we get there with the Supreme Court that is against us, against it?
It's been documented our society benefits by inclusion, not exclusion of the people. We get to learn more about people, we get to understand people, and we get to see there's a benefit, and there's knowledge coming from all races, all sexes. And now we're going back. We're going back to that old white man rule of deciding who's accepted or not.
That's terrible. Okay, now we'll take one caller. Imhotep, you have a question coming for us today dealing with affirmative action issues, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, how you doing, Brother Nate? Thanks for taking my call into your Mr. Attorney Grimes, and I'm sorry, the colleague there, but I'll say hello to her too. I appreciate you all. It's my mother has been a lawyer 50 years, and she's been belly aching since all this. We've talked, and you learn a lot being a child of a lawyer over the years, and just by listening, and I'm a listener, so. I don't know how we got here. Supposedly they violated their own rules in Article 3 to even hear the case with the Colorado case, affirmative action. I think the aristocracy and the plutocracy. We know what the monies that have been paid to the Supreme Court justices. And I want to go back. I think it was last week. You mentioned something about Trump and these three that got in. Because my mother said definitely Kavanaugh and Cohen Barrett and Gorsuch wouldn't have got in if Hillary Clinton was president. But we got to go all the way back to the second George Bush, when Gore, that hanging chads, because my children, my oldest child went to vote that day in Jacksonville, in Florida in 2000, and the line was, she said it took 5 hours to just get to the front. So I think we lost those 2 seats then with Alito and Roberts. So we basically lost 5 seats with 2000 election being stolen from Gore, and then with what happened with Trump. So it is a nasty system. The system is very nasty, and this is going to permeate down into the employment sector, because trust me, I'm a healthcare professional, and they holler about diversity all day long. But when you look at middle managers, management, upper management, there's nobody black in it. There's nobody black. Look at the chiefs and the deans. Look at the chief of surgeries at IU. Look at the chief of surgery at St. Vincent. Milton, where you are, the esteemed lady, where you are. Go ask around and see who's the chiefs of those departments in the hospital sectors or in the clinics like that. Look and see who the chiefs are. Look and see who they are. You got black doctors out here, and they'll tell you when they get to the MD status, and then when they get to their colleagues and stuff like that, then there's an issue. I was one of the only blacks in my particular forensic field when I took up. There were people, white, who did bad things we weren't supposed to do in school, in the laboratory environment, or in the practicum when we were working to attain mixed things and things that they wasn't supposed to do, and they let them get away with it. And me and my colleague, I'll never forget, good brother, we always said to ourselves, if we did that, we'd have been booted out just in a minute. We'd have been booted out before you know it. So the system, they've created this to where they can be mediocre and marginal and get ahead. But my question is, why are we not hearing the mass media talk about the majority of the Asian groups who denounced this? They didn't like this, because we know that the guy from Texas brought this, and then they used the Asian people. But the Asian groups didn't like this, and they're not going to get another extra seat because of this. And they don't like this. So I think that divide and conquer technique is what they continue to try to use. But I do applaud a large percentage of the Asian groups that do not like what happened. They did not like this, and they know that that's not going to allow them one extra seat by using us and stepping on us, when majority of those people admitted are legacies and people with money, or as we know, even George, second Bush even said he was barely a C student, and his dad got him in, I think it was West Point, I think, that he got in. So we know that, whereas Colin Powell graduated magna cum laude in electrical engineering from West Point. He got in on affirmative action. So it's a nasty system. I don't know where we go from here. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you very much. And now we'll take Tommy on the local station. Tommy, producer, we'll talk to Tommy real quickly. I had a question coming for us today, Tommy.
Listen to your message and everything, but you know we really don't need affirmative action if the game is playing fair. And when is going to be our time to for playing a fair playing field? We would not really need that affirmative action.
Well, we don't have a fair playing field. So what do we do to offset that unfairness, Tommy?
Well,
could you speak up? I can barely hear you.
No,
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
It just seems to me that we do need affirmative action, but if the game was built fairly, we wouldn't need it. And I don't know why they were so affirmative action. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thanks, Tommy. Okay, now Pierre, you have a question coming about affirmative action today, Pierre.
Good afternoon, Nate. Can you hear me good? I'm in a cafe.
Loud and clear, loud and clear.
Okay, loud and clear. Hey, Nate, you might have to educate the other attorneys, and I'd be interested to know if they have these programs in their states. But can you expand on our CLEO program here in Indiana, and will that be affected? Now, the CLEO program helps kids from the, they say social economic, underprivileged or whatever background, African Americans, and I would suspect Hispanics and other students. They give them, they get them into that early law program before they go off to law school. Will that be affected now? Will they be able to continue that program? And do universities have the right to set their admission goals and pursue their aims and their missions for their universities? And I'll just sit back and listen.
Well, that's an excellent question, Pierre. The Indiana CLEO, Indiana Continuing Legal Education Program, is a program that was introduced in the state by our former outstanding Chief Justice Randall Shepard. Chief Justice Shepard was Republican, but he was a fair-minded individual, super bright, and we had a significant underrepresentation of Black lawyers in the state of Indiana. And so I met with him, and I served as a regional assistant on the national CLEO program. And so he came up with the idea of putting together the Republicans and the Democrat and the state legislators, and they formed a state statute that funded a program. But the iCLEO program always include white farmers. See, it's underrepresented. So we also have, in the farming community, you have these farmers that have large quantities of lands and stocks and things like that. But the one thing they don't have is money. So they live from year to year on loans and things like that. So the farming community were grossly underrepresented in the legal profession. And so in order to cure the problem, we could cure both problems at the same time. So the Indiana CLEO program always included white students, make no mistake about it. And it dealt with underrepresented folks and not just Black. Coincidentally, when I was on the board, we would admit up to 35 students, and about 30 of those students, or 27 to 28, would be African Americans. We have some Hispanic, and then we have white farmers. And so the program provided for scholarship, but more importantly, the program is still in existence, and you can go to the Supreme Court website, and you're a student interested in going to law school, and you can apply on the website. And what it does is that you have a summer program that introduces students to law. You have law faculty that teach the classes. And so what happens is that they give you a heads up when you start law school, you're better prepared to deal with the rigors of law school. And so the students have the qualification to get into law school. This program enhances their ability for success. And so to answer your question, the Supreme Court decision should not affect the Indiana law because Indiana is a state statute. It's not affirmative action. It's a state statute that deals with a different issue. It deals with the economic aspect. And so there's not been a case yet that dealt with economics in terms of promoting diversity. And so, and I think it was a very clever way that our Supreme Court justice crafted the legislation. So it should withstand scrutiny. And also, there's nobody that's in our state that I'm aware of that's in line to file a lawsuit against the Indiana Supreme Court on this issue. I just don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But thanks for the question, Pierre. Now, but the secondary issue of this is that what I'm concerned about also is that this idea of affirmative action was equally important in other areas of life. All our hiring, we have all these different programs, like federal contracts, for example, requires minority participation. The city of Indianapolis have contract. And what happened is that historically, we would have contracts and no minorities would be able to participate, even though in our city, minorities are 40% of the population, but they would have zero participation in the contract or the work of the city without these special programs. So I'm concerned that we're going to have some person with some racial animus that may start attacking these programs. With this current Supreme Court, the only thing that seemed like is not on the table is interracial marriage. You know, they abrogated a large degree of women's rights. They've now going after the minority rights, and then they went after gay and lesbian type rights. And so, what's next?
What's next?
What's next? Right, and I think you're right. I think that's probably what is next. There are these, because in the city of Chicago, where I live, they also have those specialized programs. But it would probably come, and I probably shouldn't stereotype this, but it'll probably come from a redder state where one of those programs would be challenged. That being said, yeah, I mean, I think we have to, as lawyers, be prepared for these lawsuits and be prepared to fight these lawsuits that are going to be coming down the pipeline, if they are in fact coming down the pipeline. But they may not be coming in the pipeline like in a major city like Indianapolis, or maybe not Chicago, but perhaps in a smaller jurisdiction where they where folks may challenge the set aside. We call them set asides here, contracts for minority and women-owned businesses.
Well, I want to get back to, you asked me a question at the beginning and I diverted it to talking about the recent Supreme Court case. You asked me about employment, and I'm still not addressing your question, but there was an article yesterday about the conservative judges of the Ninth Circuit are trying to take away the right of the unhoused to sleep in open space. And because they say they're taking up too many parks and too many open spaces, and they don't have a right to sleep in tents on the sidewalk or in the parks because it infringes on the health and security and the safety of other individuals. So we have things going on that I can't keep up with. But yeah, you frowning. You hadn't heard of that?
You what?
You had not heard of that? That the Ninth Circuit, some of the conservative justices, especially those appointed by Trump, are taking a position that the unhoused, the homeless, do not have a right to sleep in the open air because they infringe upon the safety and security of other people.
Where are you?
Hey, I can find it because I bought it.
I was just curious. what are they gonna do? Put a bullet in their head and kill them all? I mean, what are they
Oh,
gonna do?
that's what a mayor up in Lancaster suggests, that shoot them.
Oh, no, that's terrible.
The Ninth
That's
Circuit.
terrible, especially.
Here's the headline: Ninth Circuit conservatives blast homeless ruling. Judges assail the idea that people with nowhere else to go have a right to sleep in public. They do not. So
Wow.
I don't get that, Milton. So you're saying that if a person's homeless, some idiot judge says they have no right. So where do they go? What are they going to do with homeless folks? I mean, see, most people maybe are not sympathetic to homeless folks, but a lot of these folks are homeless because of circumstances beyond their control. And they have mental disease process. Oh, I remember one time there was a guy, Milton, that I went to college with. I won't mention his name. And, you know, he was a good student. And just coincidentally, I passed across one day. I was a young lawyer at the time, and I parked not far from my office building in his lot. And he was sleeping on the back of the lot near this wall. And then when he woke up, you know, I was going to my car. I worked that night on a case and I worked late. I was going to my car and this person, you know, woke up, and there's this guy that I knew from college, right? He was a homeless guy and he had went to college just like me, and his circumstances was kind of unique, and that put him in a predicament whereby he had no place to stay and he was homeless. And so here's a person who went to college, he did everything right, and there were some adverse circumstances that I don't want to discuss on the station that caused him to be homeless. And it was through no fault of his own, right? And so what I did is that I said, look, you know, I had about $300 or $400 cash in my pocket. I took it out, I gave it to him. I said, look, man, get your hotel. Here's a place you can go. It's like $49 a night, and give him a call. And maybe I can help straighten out your life. And that's what I did. But if I had not intervened and to this person I knew from college, what would have been a likely consequence? I mean, it actually, you know, it's kind of startling me to see a guy pop up in a parking lot near my car late at night. You know, I'm about ready to knock him out, but it turns out that I knew the guy. I mean, it was bizarre. And so I don't think that this thing about homelessness, and I just think that they're going too far. It's a bridge too far.
Allow me to read this, please. Allow me to read this. Its headline is on the front page: Ninth Circuit conservatives blast homelessness ruling. Some of the most powerful conservative judges in the United States took collective aim Wednesday at the idea that homeless people with nowhere else to go have a right to sleep in public, excoriating their liberal colleagues for ruling as such. Their scathing comments came in a set of responses to a decision Wednesday by the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals not to rehear a case in which a smaller 3-judge panel affirmed such rights in September. In their responses, the court's conservative wing painted a dystopian portrait of an American West deprived of its public spaces and under siege by an overwhelming epidemic of homelessness. The debate provided one of the clearest windows into the new political divide on the Ninth Circuit since President Trump appointed 10 judges to the traditionally liberal court and President Biden appointed 7. Judge Milam Smith Jr., one of the court's older conservative judges who was appointed by President George W. Bush, wrote in one dissent that homelessness is, quote, presently the defining public health and safety crisis in the Western United States, end of quote. So they take it
Wow.
away. They want to take away the right of the homeless to sleep in open space, in the parks or wherever they sleep.
How I mean, doesn't that fly right in the face of the First Amendment? I mean, you know, people have a right to assemble and gather as they see fit without government interference. Doesn't that fly right in the face of that?
Well, the real problem here is that beyond the constitutional issue is that if they determine that homeless folks don't have a right to sleep in public spaces, then the corollary to that is that does that give police the right to arrest them for doing that? If they're arrested, then
Right.
what do you do with them?
If you're violating the law, yeah,
If
you
you're
got,
gonna, but no prosecutor in no major city gonna prosecute somebody just for being homeless. Otherwise, he probably lose his next election for being stupid. So what do? You're gonna put them in jail for what purpose? They're not really breaking any law. You know, so
Right.
I don't know. I think that this.
But it sounds like where they want to go is they want to say being homeless and sleeping on the floor is a public nuisance, which would fall under a disorderly conduct statute. But which, you know, the disorderly conduct has historically been used in the civil rights movement to round up and wrestle with protesters and that sort of thing. So that's where it sounds like that's where they're trying to go with that, to make it some sort of public nuisance. But I mean, that's a lot to unpack. That's a lot to unpack there.
yeah, it is.
That's that. And then we started the conversation talking about affirmative action, and we talk about Trump appointees. Trump appointees have historically been unqualified to serve as judges. I mean, a lot of these appointees that he has appointed did not have the requisite experience to serve in these positions. I think it was one of his appointees had absolutely no trial experience whatsoever. A lot of these folks have been practicing law for like maybe 4 or 5 years, and they got these appointments. So I think that decision that you see is definitely an offshoot of that.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
and but
Just like the judge that's handling his case down in Florida, right?
yeah, but
Exactly. Yeah. Judge.
Well,
Kennedy.
historically, up until Trump became president, there was a process through the American Bar Association where they would rate judges for qualification and experience, and that was important. Well, once he became president, they eliminated that. In other words, there was no threshold review by.
They didn't eliminate it. They didn't eliminate it. They just allowed for those people like Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Kerrigan. The ABA went along with those nominations.
No, I'm saying on federal judges, see, they don't look at the valuation. I'm not sure what the ABA even did them. I didn't follow them. But the idea is that traditionally there was evaluation by Bar Association and stuff like that. And I've been on these judicial committees for a long time, and they went away from that. And so now we have historical, in terms of appointment, we have one president appointed probably a record number of judges, particularly at the Supreme Court level. And so now we see these decisions that are just contrary to the will of the people of the United States. And then we have this severe ethical issues that we're dealing with. We see that 2 of the most prominent conservative judges, there was a guy I watched in the correspondence dinner, and he was making a joke, and he was talking about what billionaires could buy. I don't know if anybody watched that. He said billionaires come up with all kinds of stuff they buy. And now they determined that they're going to buy a Supreme Court judge. And it was very profound. Everybody laughed about it. And then as more details come out, we realized that that joke had a lot of truism to it in terms of how the conservative justice now have been controlled, or at least it appears on the surface, have a great deal of influence on their decision-making process. And so, but the point we're making though is that these decisions are so bad. And is there any positive that we can get from this very draconian decision? I saw that one of the HBCU presidents says that maybe the only positive is that it may increase the enrollment or the tip enrollment at minority universities. What do you think?
Well, of course, if they're going to go to school, they got to go to school somewhere, and it seems as though the door is being closed to the elite schools. So that may be why do I want to say this? It's not a compliment. It might increase the enrollment in Black universities, yeah, but here we go again with separate, pretended to be equal education, and it's not, if that happens.
And then the HBCUs are only equipped to handle so many students.
Right.
So then where do you have that overflow? Where do they go, to school? Because we're focusing, I guess, on Harvard and the other elite schools, but University of North Carolina, which is also a very good school, but it's not considered an elite and an Ivy school. So that admissions policy was also challenged. So you have, I don't want to say second tier, but you have your other schools where African Americans and other minorities will not be benefiting from affirmative action at those schools either. So, it's really kind of an assault on African Americans getting an education, getting a higher education as well. Altogether, because there's not going to be enough spaces.
I snub those elite schools, and it's just my defense mechanism. But I will admit, when I went to my granddaughter's graduation from Yale University last month, and I had an opportunity to walk on that campus, Nate, it is unbelievable the money they have, in the structures they have, in the educational facilities they have. We need to be exposed to that. We need that. We created that. We gave them all that, and that's ours too. And more African American students and grown-ups too need to be exposed to that. I was enthralled. I was just very impressed. That was my first visit there, was her graduation, and I've never walked on those campuses before, but there is a difference.
I had the pleasure of when Sonia, Dr. Smith, she was a visiting professor at MIT. MIT is the world's #1 scientific university, and it's probably the wealthiest school on the planet based on student population. They have a very selective admission process. They had about 10,000 students, and they got like 3,500 faculty. And so they have this huge campus with all of the major corporations like Boeing and these corporations. So they're doing advanced wind tunnel issues on jet propulsion and things like that. So these new ideas in terms of aviation and the sciences, a lot of them emanating from universities like MIT. But the one thing they didn't have a lot of were African Americans.
Right.
So already in the #1 research institution in the world, on campus, I saw white students, I saw Asian students, but rarely, if ever, did I see African American students.
Right.
So that was before this rule. And so that admission process is so selective to get into a university like that to start with. So now the 1 or 2 persons that make the cut, are they gonna be excluded now? I don't know, but we have one quick caller before we end. Caller, you have a quick question for us today, Becky?
Hi, yes, graduated from a small Lutheran college in Illinois. And, you know, I lived through people looking at me going, oh, you got here because of affirmative action. And I'd go, well, no, believe it or not, I never checked the box. And when I got there for minority orientation, totally threw them off because with my name and coming from Indianapolis and everything, they had no clue I was Black. But, okay, my question is, they've gotten rid of this whole race thing, but as an Asian person, they did not count as a racial minority in this country? Or did somebody, much like they've done with white women and hoodwinked them into thinking that it's not about that, affirmative action is not about them? Did they not see that affirmative action now is this whole ruling could actually keep them out even more? I mean, I just was asking that question.
I didn't quite understand. Go ahead.
Hey, Becky, can you repeat that last part, please? I think you were saying that the Asian students will be more adversely affected by this ruling than Black students. Becky, did we lose her? I think she was saying, okay, she hung up. Well, what I think what she was saying is that she went to school and she never checked the box as to what her race was.
Got that part.
But then she was saying that because of this ruling, that it would impact those Asian students more than Black students, because I guess she was referencing the legacy admissions of white students. You know, I don't know. You know, I'm not an expert. I can't even make a forecast on something like that. I don't know. Maybe our guest can, Ms. Attorney House. What is your thought process?
I think that she's right. The Asian Americans have been also rallying against this idea of the model minority, right? Because I think in the case, the U.S. Supreme Court case, they were talking about how Asians are, their test scores, you know, don't lend themselves to being, you know, discriminated against because of, you know, because they're able to test well. They're not discriminated against, but so they are how do you say, they're the model minority, but that stereotype hurts them as well, and that they rally against being, you know, being ostracized, because that's used to hurt Black and Latinos, and when it hurts the Black and Latinos, it ultimately hurts them as well. So I know that they are rallying against that as well. Now, in terms of what they are actually doing specifically, I don't know, but I do know that model minority status that they have is not something that benefits their community either.
Okay, we thank you for calling in today. Thank our special guest, Milton. Thank you so much, as always, in Attorney House. And I need to alert everyone that we're not going to broadcast next Saturday, July 15th, and we'll join us on July 22nd. And until then, we'll be bringing the current legal issue of the day. And don't forget to tell your friends, and don't forget to call in next time. And you could also visit us, just type in legal issue of the day with Nathaniel Lee. You could review the show on the internet. Thank you, and may God bless and keep you until we talk once again. Take care, everybody, and have a great day.
Good day, Nate. Take care, bro. Bye-bye, Ms. House.